Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here, and I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about theories. One of the interesting features I think you'll find, and I don't know if interesting is the correct word, sometimes I think better word would be frustrating, overwhelming, bizarre, when we start thinking about all the theories that exist to explain human behavior. And what I found when I initially started studying genocide is that there was not a smooth transition between criminal justice, criminological, and sociological and psychological theories to genocide. So that might explain in part why we don't see a whole lot of criminal justice work on genocide, although, as I mentioned, that's starting to change. One of the things I think that comes into play, for example, would be trying to explain the level of analysis. That, for example, if when I teach my course on serial murder, a lot of times we start applying some theories that focus on an individual and that individual's behavior within a particular social setting. So we start getting into the whole idea that maybe there's some type of genetic or biological issue that may lead someone to be more likely to engage in violent behavior. That there's a lot of research out there showing that certain brain structures are different in violent people and nonviolent people, and there's different types of not only structural but also possibly genetic predispositions, although I don't think we really have solid evidence on that, but there's some hypotheses about that, a genetic predisposition, perhaps for certain brain functioning. And we might also see that that there's certain neurotransmitters that are in short supply or too much supply, oversupply, and that can increase problems with impulse control or violent behavior. So there's all these theories at kind of the individual level. And then we start getting more at the psychological level of mental disorders. Some would say, well, the person is out of touch with reality. Often we find that in cases of homicide, including serial murder, that that the person is not out of touch with reality. They may have some underlying mental disorders, but we often do not see a psychotic break in that sense. And even in cases of genocide, if we had an actively psychotic leader promoting genocide, my next question would be, why would all these people, followers, follow a psychotic leader? And so we want to ask those questions. We want to look at leaders. We also want to look at followers. We want to look at the interaction. So we start moving at a social psychological level. Then we start looking at institutions. We start, getting a larger picture here, and we start thinking about, okay, well, for example, in many genocides, you see the government encouraging, participating, and carrying out the genocide in many cases. And so you see a different organizational aspect where you have different institutions promoting, engaging in genocide and mass killings. You have the educational system, you have the medical system, the political system, the law enforcement system, the judicial system, and the religious system, for example, and all these other interlocking systems all coming together to engage in an active genocide. One example I'll give you right away in the medical institution is you can look at Lifton's work on the Nazi doctors. Just a fascinating study, and there's been several studies on the Nazi doctors and how they practiced their genocidal behavior in that regard. There's also other books written about particular organizations that carried out mass killings. And so how does all that make sense? We kind of see the individual level, the small group level, and the large institutional societal level. And then we have all these theories that are attached to these different levels of analysis, which makes things even more complex. And of course, there could be a combination of factors that come together. One of the questions I pose in an article or a book chapter that I wrote was basically in analyzing a particular individual who killed 70 people. Is this person a serial murderer? Is this person a sadistic, violent, dangerous person? Is this person someone who was, exposed to forces beyond his control that led to his murderous behavior? So how do we conceptualize that? What's the situation? And I started looking at this in comparative analysis of two perpetrators: the one that killed 70, and then the one that led killings, mass killings. Whether or not he actually physically engaged in any particular homicide is questionable, but he certainly encouraged, directed, and promoted mass murder. So how do we make sense of those, individuals? And then we can move it into comparing groups. And so how do we go about this? So I have really more questions here than answers, but in theorizing that many times we already have our theories floating around our heads to explain human behavior. It doesn't matter what question we pose. You're going to have a notion, an idea, and you could articulate that in discussion with others. And there may be a lot of uncertainties or areas that are not clear, but certainly I think everyone has theories. Everyone has explanations of social behavior. Some may be supported by research more than others, and that's what we start looking at, seeing if the research supports some of these theories. What we often find is that multiple theories have support, and we also find that some flaws in some theories become strengths of other theories, and vice versa. And so we run into this whole problem of not only how do we explain genocide, but what do we do about it to prevent it or to intervene at the early stages? So in another sense, of course, then you see a whole other area, a developmental model, if you will, or a stage model or process model of genocide occurring. And to even make this more unclear and complex, we have quantitative researchers and qualitative researchers. And some, of course, that combine. You have those quantitative researchers that are crunching the numbers and looking at relationships and the strengths of relationships between certain variables. For example, one of my early studies, I looked at level of technology and number of deaths, and found that that you could have low levels of technology and a very high amount of murder. That because my initial idea was that certainly high tech would probably lead to a higher number of deaths. But that's not necessarily the case. And then, of course, I have to step back and say, do I want to look at raw numbers, or do I want to look at proportion that are killed? So there's all these numerical aspects that we have to consider in how we actually collect our data, how we present it, how we analyze it. And then with the qualitative research, when we're trying to look at deep meanings and understandings and explanations, we run into a lot of problems as well. A big problem, of course, is if we have a small sample of research subjects, for example, what does that represent? How representative is that of the population of perpetrators, for example? And so you'll see that in the book Machete Season, where you have a very small sample of perpetrators, but such rich, detailed accounts. And, one of the things to do, of course, is to replicate those types of interviews with different groups and wait till you saturate the sampling in that regard. But still, we want to know that are there different theories that may explain different types of genocide? So we run into those problems as well. How do we connect all this? My own research, as you'll see, is based on Lonnie Athens' violentization theory and some of his newer studies on violent behavior and sociology. And so I move now with a central theme of domination and of power, and then within a process of genocides emerging. And I think the theorizing is no different in the problems that we face and some of the issues than you do in all your other classes, where you have a professor that says, okay, let's go over these half dozen theories. And maybe sometimes the professor will say, which one do you prefer to use, and why not the others? And we run into that again and again. I tell my students, if you read my work and the theory that I've applied to genocide, I would rather have you critique it, be critical of it, look at the problems, look at what it doesn't answer and how it can be improved, than to say, oh, neat theory, and just go along. That I like it when I get a good critical analysis, because then I know to move on. One of my earlier critiques I had focused on the idea that I didn't focus on enough of those large institutions, the government or the political system, the medical institutions, the educational institutions, family, for example. So I knew I had to bring that in and to start to bring that into the analysis, and maybe even reanalyze some of my data to see how things fit together or didn't. And of course, we want to look at negative cases too. I think one of the profound questions Lonnie Athens asked in his interview with those that were in prison for assault, rape, and homicide is, of course, he asked what happened, but he also asked, tell me about times where you almost killed someone but you didn't. And so we also want to see negative cases. Do we have situations where those variables are present, but genocide doesn't occur? See this more in the quantitative research. So to summarize, we still have a lot of work to do in developing criminal justice related theories of genocide. Thank you.